On this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips, we ask, are you ambitious or are you actually a workaholic? And we'll look at climbing the corporate ladder and corporate culture and the need for both courage and compassion. Welcome to Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty Leadership Interview Series. I'm your host, Dov Barron, founder of Full Monty Leadership. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in, we're about to go full Monty. If you're a regular, big thank you to you for being one of the 1.5 million plus downloads and making us number one podcast, Fortune 500, and consistently keeping us at the top in business, leadership, next-gen leadership, and a whole bunch of other categories. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Remember, we always need your help in staying relevant, so get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's strip it down and dive in. Our guest today is Mindy Mackenzie. She is an accomplished corporate executive, a highly acclaimed speaker, and CEO advisor. Before she started this advisory practice, Mindy served as the Chief Performance Officer at Beam, Inc. Now, if you're thinking that sounds familiar, it's not about light bulbs. Bean, Saturday night, few Jim Beans, that's the company, where she earned the nickname of the Velvet Hammer. Yes, the Velvet Hammer. Let that go wherever you think that goes. She was revered for telling the truth amongst executive teams by exhibiting bold combination of honesty and empathy. Her impressive career also includes 5 years at Campbell's Soup. No, she wasn't making the soup, she was an executive, where she lived and worked overseas. For 9 years, she was at Wal-Mart, where she advanced through various senior executive roles in leadership, HR, organizational development. She's an expert on telling the truth in the workplace. Her expertise include leadership, organizational effectiveness, transformational change, culture, and strategy. Earlier this year, Mindy and I sat down to meet for breakfast for a 15-minute chat that turned into over an hour of completely kick-ass conversation about everything leadership related, including the need for all of us to develop bigger, empathetic executive gonads. So put your hands together and please welcome Mindy Mackenzie. Woo! The crowd goes wild. Welcome, love. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Dov. Great to be here.
It's good to have you. It was great meeting you earlier this year. Really enjoyed it. I want to jump into this right off the bat because it was a great conversation. You and I really did talk about a lot of things that I don't think either of us were particularly planning on talking about. You were here visiting Whistler to go skiing, I believe.
Yep,
which
that's
was
right.
pretty cool. For me, there's a very interesting dichotomy. When I listen to people talking about corporate culture and corporate people who are not specifically from that world, there seems to be this interesting dichotomy of stereotypes around those climbing the corporate ladder and to those who get to the top. There's this idea that the person climbing the ladder must be a mindless, moralless drone who is void of a spine. And then once they get to the top, they become these dictatorial psychopaths. Your new book, which is called The Courage Solution, The Power of Telling the Truth with Your Boss, hence having a spine, your peers, and your team. Does that relate to these stereotypes? And if it does, tell us why you wrote the book, because you've been at that top, you've climbed the ladder, you've got to the top. Tell us about it.
So, I wrote the book first off because I think there's a crisis in the corporate world. And a crisis in my experience is that the thing that companies and individuals need most, they often get least. And that's the truth. And I saw that again and again and again at the 3 companies that you just referenced I worked at, but also in the companies that I work with today. And the reason for the absence of truth is because people are afraid to tell it and they're afraid of the consequences. And that epidemic of fear goes all the way to the C-suite and all the way to the front ranks. So I wrote the Courage Solution actually to cure people of their fear. I do think the stereotypes that you mentioned may be true for some, but my experience is not the case. My experience is that most people are really well-intentioned in the corporate world. They're smart, they work hard, but they slowly get anesthetized. They get too politicized, and they get so concerned about the negative consequences of saying what they really think, whether it's what the numbers are really saying or saying in the meeting as opposed to outside of the meeting what they really think, that over time they develop a bad habit. of not telling the truth, and everybody suffers.
Yeah, I remember that when you and I sat down and we were talking, that was a big subject for us, is that how do you get people over that indoctrinated fear? Because I think it is indoctrinated, particularly today when, you and I were talking about how back in the day you looked at getting a 20 or a 40-year career. Nobody thinks about that anymore, and your job can be gone like that. And meanwhile, people are still running out and getting crazy mortgages and paying leases on Mercedes and all those kinds of things. And so they're up to here with responsibility, and they go, oh, but if I tell the boss the truth, or I tell the person above me the truth, I might have to move into a one-bedroom apartment in my mother's basement. So how do you get them past that? Because that, I know, because I've had those conversations, is a very real fear for them.
I think it's a very real fear, and I also think it's a very real exaggerated fear. And that's not a welcome concept to most people. When I ask people what they think about their job, most of the time, Dov, they say things like, well, I'd be happier if my boss wasn't such a jerk, or I'd be happier if my peers weren't so competitive, or I'd be happier if my direct reports were smarter, more capable. And I always say, well, that may be true, folks. The only thing that you can reliably change or control at any company is yourself. Mm-hmm. And that can be an unwelcome fact, but it is the truth. And I think that's where people need to start, is telling themselves the truth first, that they own the reality that they're creating, and that all of this misery and disengagement they may be feeling, candidly, no matter how bad their boss is, most bad bosses are going nowhere, they can do something about it. And it starts with them changing how they engage with the people that they work with. And it does require courage, but it also requires wisdom. And we talked a lot about that. You can't be some crazy nut job just dropping verbal bombs everywhere, but you can actually thrive in your career and say most of the time what you think in most situations if you know how to do it, and get happier, candidly, in the process.
Okay, so let's go to nuts and bolts practicality.
Yeah.
I'm a VP of something.
Yep.
And I've got this person who is an executive who I have to answer to, who is a tool, who doesn't get it, and who not only doesn't get it, but often steals my ideas and takes credit, because we hear that a lot. Mm-hmm. How do I approach that situation as that person who is also quite genuinely concerned about regular income?
Sure. Well, the first thing you have to do is you got to decide that you're going to invest the time to build a relationship long term with this tool, as you say.
It's a technical term.
It's a technical term. I've used it myself. The fact is they're likely not going anywhere. And so unless you're going to hop around to different companies waiting to find the perfect people and human beings with no flaws, you're going to have to figure out a way to build a relationship based on mutual respect and one that you can manage. And I say two things. I'll give you a more strategic, longer term tip, and then something for your listeners to consider in more shorter term to push back with these people that can be really challenging. But the first thing that I would say is, when I was a therapist many, many years ago, I learned a therapeutic technique called stroke, stroke, kick. And the concept was that people will pay you as a psychotherapist. They'll pay you money to come in and help them overcome something. And in that process, you're going to have to challenge their belief system. And yet, even when people are paying for it, people don't like being challenged. We know this, right? This is human nature. And so this technique we learned was you have to stroke somebody 2 times for every time you're going to kick them. Stroking is genuine affirmation, some type of positive reinforcement of something that they're doing well. And then the kick is obviously the challenge, the pushback, the disagreeing. And if you move that from a therapeutic environment into a work relationship environment, it's very apt, because if you play a long game, this person that's engaging with this senior vice president who takes credit that you referenced, listen, you got to decide, is there anything likable about this person? Do they have any skills? Do they have anything redeeming about them? And 99.99% of the time, there is. You got to focus on those few things. And then you have to look for ways to affirm that person to them and with others, and start building a wellspring of goodwill. Now, that can be so repugnant, Dov, because people are like, that guy's the problem. It's not me. But I go back to, listen, mate, you can only reliably change or control one thing at your company. Right. It doesn't matter how senior you are, and that's yourself. So you have to want to. So I would say, first off, play a long game. And then second off, there's this really cool tip that I actually share in the book that is so powerful. It's called the LCS framework. I wish I was smart enough to come up with it, but I actually learned it when I was at Walmart from a leadership course that we had, and it works beautifully. But it's basically a technique that you can use with people when you want to disagree and be agreeable. And the LCS stands for like, concern, and suggest. And those words are very important in that sequence. And fundamentally, if you're wanting to disagree with someone, you first say what you like about the position that they're taking on an issue. And I always say, if you can find nothing that you agree with, then you at least acknowledge their passion for the topic. So you might have to say something, I really like the fact and appreciate the fact, boss, or whomever, that you're really, really passionate about this particular topic. My concern is, and you go right into your concern, you list your concerns crisply, and therefore my suggestion is, at the end of the day, you cannot control what these people in power are going to do, but you will feel better if you start contributing in a different way, saying what you think, and you're going to go home clean at night, and you'll find that your energy and your fulfillment level are higher because you're not feeling like you're playing a game all day long, and because that's exhausting.
Yeah, and I think that, that's the point, is that I think that many people, both inside the corporate world and outside the corporate world, think that climbing the corporate ladder, whatever term one wants to use, being ambitious, is a game, and that you have to play it as a game, and therefore it's void of authenticity. and I, you and I had this great conversation around this, that I don't think that's the case at all. I think that it requires authenticity, and I think it's very aligned with what you're saying around telling the truth. But that is also a filter, because even if you follow LCS, sometimes you're going to meet somebody who's going to go, get the hell out of here, because what I need is a sycophantic follower who's just going to tug their forelock and go, yes, boss, you're right, you're always right. We see these in comedy shows because they're always there. And I think that in some way, that even as a comedy thing, has infected the belief systems of what people think is the game. But the people who actually make it, I think there are two categories of those, and they are the ruthless bastards who just will stomp on anybody. And do they succeed? I honestly see that they do. They do succeed.
Absolutely.
Are they liked? No. Are they fulfilled? I would doubt it, personally. The ones I've met, personally, are not very fulfilled. But there is another category, and the other category are just as big and maybe bigger, and that they are authentic, they tell the truth, they're compassionate, they're loving, they're courageous, but they've usually changed careers a lot. They've usually had to navigate their way through to find the right place. And I think that that's part of the challenge is, are you willing to say no? Are you willing to walk away? But, and this is, I think, what you said is so important for people to get, but with full accountability, meaning you don't just get to go, but my boss is an asshole.
That's right. And here's the thing. I actually think it's a smaller percentage, that former category that you talked about. I really do. And the other thing I'd say is people fall on a spectrum. Humans have good days, they have bad days. You can have a great boss who does some really bad boss stuff. And you can have, frankly, a boss who's bad most of the time, surprise and delight you. The key here is that you own the reality you're creating, and you own the fact that your own misery, your own impact, your own effectiveness. And what drives me insane is when I talk to professionals, they're so busy expending energy, Dove, blaming everybody else and being so sure and talking about the corporate game and everything. And I just say, you know what? If you just expended half that energy on modifying your behavior and trying different things, you'd be astonished at the progress you could make and the minimization of the anxiety you feel. And that, believe me, people don't like it when I say that, because it's really convenient to blame the man, as some people say, oh, it's the man, the big corporate bad guy. Yeah, most people aren't that evil, candidly.
No, but it's good for the story.
Oh, it's great for the story, and it's a really good way to make an excuse for you not being where you're going to be. I can just
Right.
hear your listeners screaming right now, going, "That's so unfair!" Mindy, that's terrible. And I say, it's not that I'm not empathetic to their situation. It's just that I firmly believe that you can behave your way into a different experience on the job.
So, and you have this great background. I think it's a great background because the background is HR, but before that, it's being a therapist, right? And you and I had that in common. So, how does that, for our viewers, for our listeners, how does that translate when it comes to, because you now advise and guide leaders, executives, CEOs, etc., who, the poison word is therapy. Uh, you need therapy. Ah! Hair's on fire, running out of the room. How does that translate over? Because you said the velvet hammer, which I love, which is this, is direct, it's compassionate. How does that therapeutic process translate over when you're working with these guys and gals to have them embrace that they need to look at them first as opposed to blame?
I don't know that it's so much the therapeutic process because I haven't practiced in 20 plus years. I would say the folks that end up working with me, Dov, they know what I stand for, and they only hire me because they know they're going to get a big dose of what they can, helping them think through what they can do different to get more of what they want. I will say that the type of therapy that I was trained in and schooled in all those many years ago was called brief solutions therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I think it's far more popular now than it used to be. But fundamentally, Dov, it was, as you would know, someone brings in an issue and your job as a therapist is to put yourself out of a job. That's the way I see myself as an advisor. My job is not to build reliance. My job is there to help them be a sounding board, think through difficult issues, be available for them when they want to solve an issue. Otherwise, they've done a pretty dang good job before I ever came on the scene. Mm-hmm. People are resourceful, and I think the same of these great executives that I have the chance to partner with. I'm there just to help them be more successful, but not to try to, I don't know, therapize the relationship. What about you? Because I know you advise a lot of executives. How do you do that given your background and your clientele now?
Well, for me, I've never made a separation. I don't think there is a separation because, as I've said for years, people are people. And the biggest mistake that we make is we're going, well, this is my professional life and this is my personal life. And my response to that is that's horseshit because you're in both places. And so unless you are fully putting on a mask to go to work or to go home, you're in both places. So as you just said earlier, the only thing you can work on is you. And so let's do that. Now you can call that therapy or you can call that thinking better. You can call that personal responsibility. You can call it whatever label you want to put on it. But the bottom line is you got to deal with your stuff, whatever your stuff is. And your stuff is going to show up where at home with your wife or your husband, it's going to show up with your partner in life, it's going to show up with your kids, it's going to show up with the executives you deal with your peers or the people above you. And so, again, just like you just said, you got to come back to you. And as you said, people just love to blame. Right?
Yes.
I mean, I like it as much as anybody else.
Me too.
I would like to say it's not me. But the problem with this, for all of us, including me, is guess what? You're the common denominator in all your relationships. So if people are always assholes, who's the common denominator? If people always treat you unfairly, who's the common denominator? And it's like that is so profound for people to actually grasp that they are the common denominator in all of their problems. Like, I've had people just go,
yes.
Like it's like I just parted the Red Sea for them, That's it.
And here's the thing, though, Dov. They have that awakening, and then there's this oh no moment of, but what do I do now? And my whole point is that there are practical things that you can do to tweak your behavior, to tweak what you're doing that can give you disproportionately positive results. So there's always hope. And even if it is, let's go back to the bad boss concept, even if it is that at the end of the line, You have got to change bosses. What you've done and how you've gotten there, you feel good because you've done everything that you could do to lead that relationship, to lead that boss, to engage in a different way. And fundamentally, then if it's not the right fit, then you got to go get another boss. But when you haven't gone through that process, you always have that insecurity, that sense of uncertainty, and the tendency to revert to form, which, as we just said, is to blame.
One of the things that my wife and I used to teach a relationship program. We still teach it, but we teach it inside corporations now. Okay, but we used to teach it romantically, and it still has the same impact. But one of the things I used to say is, I really get pissed off at people who walk away from relationships, and I also get really pissed off at people who stay in relationships, and it's for the same reason. The people who walk away from relationships haven't really shown up, haven't really taken that personal responsibility of saying, I'm the common denominator. Has this pattern shown up before? Whether that's between you and a boss, or you and a peer, or you and somebody you take care of, or whether it's romantic. And the other side is, so they walk away before they've done that, and the other side is they stay in relationships too long because they haven't stated the truth of, listen, this is who I am, this is what's true for me, this is what's authentic with me, and do it in a compassionate and empathetic and LCS way, And so for me, it's interesting because a lot of what you and I are talking about, I'm going to give it a new category, not for you and I, but a new category for our viewers and listeners, and that is healthy boundaries.
Yes.
So I want to put it over to you. Healthy boundaries, because part of healthy boundaries is self-responsibility, but how would you communicate that message over to people? That's likely what's missing for them.
Sure. It manifests in so many different ways, as you know from your work. Let's take a simple way. People who never take vacation time. I just heard this this great statistic. It's not great. It's actually so disturbing. But in North America, 41% of people don't take their allotted vacation time. And you're like, what the heck? And a lot of people are really drained. They lack energy. They're overwhelmed. They're tired. They're tethered to their electronics and all the devices that connect them to work. And there's this kind of corporate almost sense of doom that this is the way they have to live their life, to play the game, to advance. This is a really good place where healthy boundaries show up, because most people aren't going to invite you to take a 2 or 3 week holiday unplugged from the office. And yet that is something that I advise for every one of my clients, all the people who work for me, that when they take time off, they need to be unplugged and they need to take significant periods of time off. And it seems like a very simple example, but most people just absolutely can't wrap their mind around creating a healthy boundary where you would engage, protect time with yourself, with your families, with your friends, and have time to refresh, because we all know that's better for us, and establish that boundary at work, and they don't know how to do it. And in fact, it's actually quite possible to do. But that would be an example of a healthy boundary that is doable and that I teach, but most people reject out of hand because they can't imagine doing it. And it's actually quite fundamental and quite basic.
Now for you entered the corporate world as a single mom.
I did.
And you climbed through that ladder as a single mom. So help our viewers, our listeners grasp, because that's why I asked the question. That is really like, if you wouldn't have had boundaries, I mean, your kid would have been wacky doodles, I'm sure, right? So you had to have some kind of boundaries, because as I said, there's not a personal life and a professional life, but there are personal responsibilities and there are professional responsibilities, and that's different. So how did you create the boundary there that allowed you still to climb the ladder? Because I know I've had conversations with people, not necessarily my clients, but people who work for others, who have said, I just can't do that. I have to be on call. If my boss reaches out to me, I got to be on call. And I go, well, you've got 2 kids. You have a life.
That's right.
So give us some guidance. Help these people see how that is possible, because you are the living example. You've done it, and you went to the very top.
Yeah, I'd say I did it really poorly for a long time. Everything that I shared now is like all through all the mistakes I made and hard lessons,
Yeah, but
which is
it's
why I
important
said
that people learn from your mistakes.
exactly don't make all the mistakes I made. Uh, so let's take this example of vacation. Until I moved to Australia, I'd never taken more than 1 week off,
Right.
like a good old fashioned American, good old Puritan, and was never like unplugged. And then I go down there, Dov, and I see the CEO and all these people, all the way to my assistant taking 3 week holidays. And I'm
Of
like,
course.
what the is going on here? No one blinks an eye. Business doesn't shift. There's no drama. And what I observed is they do three things really well. And these three things that I learned, I actually applied when I came back to the States and started working for Jim Beam for a very, very demanding boss. And who was certainly not inviting me to take a 2 week vacation with my son in the summertime. But here's what they did. The first thing they did was they deputized someone credible to cover their area in their absence. And that person had the power, the authority to make decisions and were a real proxy for the person that was leaving, number one. Number two, they communicated broadly why they picked that person, how to engage with that person, and how customer issues were to be handled. So depending on the role, they would communicate to their outside customers, internal customers, their direct reports, the peers. Everybody knew who was the point person, what issues would come up likely in the 2 to 3 week time frame while they were going to be out, how they were to be handled, and that they would, this person would be handling it. And third, they just reinforced that they would be completely unplugged. And so when I fast forward, I moved to Chicago from Sydney, Australia. Never done this before. And it's the first summer that I'm working at Jim Beam. And I say to my boss, the CEO, I said, hey, I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. Tom is going to be in charge while I'm gone. And here's all the projects that we've got in motion. Here's blah, 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 blah. Well, so my boss didn't believe me, and I found this out later. My boss and the CFO,
This is like some kind of joke.
right,
You're funny, Mindy.
I told my team, I told everybody was cool. I said, treat Tom like that. And I said, Tom, you're in charge. I'm telling you, you're making decisions. You're engaging with the CEO, with the CFO. You need something. Here's the deal. You have the keys to the kingdom. I trust you. And unless somebody dies, and I said this over and over, unless somebody dies, do not call me. I am putting my BlackBerry, because that's what I carried at the time, in the safe. Here's the phone. I only gave the phone number of the hotel to my assistant. She's brilliant. And I said, only give that out if somebody dies, and they can call the hotel front desk and come find me at the pool. So I did. Well, I go for 2 weeks, and I had a little twinge of, oh, I really hope this works as I'm back in America, and all this stuff. But I did it. My son and I had a wonderful trip. I come back, rock up in the morning on that Monday morning, and I get practically tackled by the CFO going, I can't believe you did it. We emailed you, we called you, we texted you, nothing. We got nothing back from you. And I was like, did anybody die? He's like, no. How did Tom do? He did great. Blah, 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 blah. And so walked into my boss's office, and CFO comes in. 90 minutes later, the guys had downloaded me on everything, and it was it. Nothing bad happened. And what the best thing, though, that came out of that was later, separately, both my CEO and the CFO said to me, because you did that, Mindy, which we didn't think was possible, nor did we help you out at all, we're going to try it ourselves with our own families. And that, to me, was like this big aha moment that I'm like, you cannot wait for the system around you to change. You can't wait for a personal invitation from your boss. You've got to start setting those boundaries and behave your way into a new way of living, even though it's going to be uncomfortable. It's not going to be popular. And certainly it won't be something that everybody else is doing. But again, it goes back to, do you want to live a happy, fulfilled life? Or do you want to sit around blaming your boss for being, a workaholic?
But I think that, I've said this on different occasions around different subjects, but it certainly fits here too. I think that we're a culture in North America that eats, sleeps, and breathes fear.
Yes.
I think we're fed it through the media. We're fed it in every possible way. If it bleeds, it leads mentality. And so even as our our listeners are seeing this, it's very likely there's a mindset of, yeah, I understand, but that's true for you. You were at the top. I'm not at the top. That wouldn't work. And what's more, even if I'm at the top, so let's say I am in the C-suite, and I put somebody in that position and I say, okay, Fred is going to be in charge, or Ellen's going to take care of this, their fear is, if Ellen does a better job than me, I'm out of work. Ellen gets paid less than me, and if I put Ellen in the position and the company realizes Ellen can carry this, and they pay her 40 grand less a year, why wouldn't they get rid of me? So they go, that's it, screw it, I'm going to work weekends as well.
Yes. Oh, I know. And I know absolutely somebody can be thinking that. But my response to that would be, listen, there's also the positive side that they can see you as someone who is brave, who is grounded, who is mature, unthreatened, generous, and giving somebody an opportunity to step up and grow. That it could not be that horrible, worst possible outcome. It could be the best possible outcome. It could demonstrate that you could take on more capacity because you've got such a good direct report team. It doesn't have to be that dark side interpretation. The other thing that I would say about this is I think there's an energy at work when I left for that vacation, and I don't want to make this too spiritual sounding, but it is a spiritual principle. I did everything in my power to set my boss up for success in my absence. I didn't just go off and say, hey, screw you guys, I deserve a vacation and blah, blah. I thought through, what would he be worried about? How can I take care of him in my absence? Because he was my number one key customer as the CHRO. My job is to help my CEO be successful.
Sure.
And then I thought about my peers and my direct reports. When you have a spirit of thinking about others and wanting to set them up for success and caring about their well-being, that permeates everything you do. And it's so much more likely that you're going to have a positive reaction versus you're so spot on about this fear thing. If you're swimming in that fear in a worst case scenario and all the sky's going to fall, you know what? You think about that stuff long enough, you're going to bring that stuff about.
Sure.
I also think that's a truism.
Yeah.
So I do think that some of this is the spirit and intent with which you establish the healthy boundaries that we're talking about.
You know, I've had so many guests on the show. I'm doing this for 7 or 8 years now, and we've talked about so many different subjects. And one of the things that consistently comes up by real leaders like yourself, people who actually do know what it means to genuinely lead, is consistently what comes up. I had a conversation with somebody just last week about this who's also a very high-level individual, and that is leading. And when I say leading, I'm not talking about you being the CEO or the CFO. I'm talking about you can be the janitor. You know, it's all leadership. But leading from a place of generosity. What you just described was an act of generosity. You considered how it might impact the other person. You took a look at what might concern them, and you were generous in taking care of that before you were gone. And I think that because of this fear mentality, we lose sight of generosity, and it becomes so resentful that it becomes, well, screw you. I'm going on holiday. As you said, I deserve it, so you freaking work it out. As opposed to, I do deserve the holiday. That's true. But how can I serve? And the real leadership, as you and I have talked about over breakfast, is service, but it's service in the mindset of generosity. That's different than service in the mindset of, ooh, I'll get something out of this.
Correct.
But service in the mindset of generosity. And for me, generosity and courage, and this is why I wanted to circle this, because it's really where you started, is generosity in an atmosphere of courage and courage in an atmosphere of generosity. Tell us what you think about that.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, and here's why. Because you want to have the power of truth-telling transform your career, Deb, then you have got to have, I say compassion, generosity, the same spirit of thinking about the other guy.
Yeah.
It is one thing to say what you think. It's a whole nother thing to say what you think and be heard. And for you to do that, take control of your daily experience with the people that you work with, that does require generosity. It requires you to be thinking about the other person, where they're at, to be thinking, if the tables were turned, how would I want to be treated in this circumstance? Would I want somebody to lie to me and tell me that meeting went great, or would I want to actually hear the truth in a way that was kindly but directly delivered? I think success in business, I think success in life, forget business because it's all one thing. I think success in life is about being willing to stop ourselves before we do the convenient thing and take that extra breath and say, is this a moment where I can make a difference that matters to the person that I'm with?
Yeah.
And can I do it in a way that they can benefit from this? Now, if you can't say yes to both of those things, don't do it. Don't go half-cocked. Don't, because you will self-immolate, and you can actually end up where you lose your job and do crazy, stupid stuff. But if you can say yes to those two things, then that sincerity and generosity of spirit is going to absolutely emanate, and it's going to be okay no matter how awkward or uncomfortable there are in the exchange that you may have. It's not about being perfect. It's about actually caring enough to muddle through in a different way.
Yeah. How do you in the book you talk about that a lot of people are, what we used to term workaholics, that they're addicted to this drive. How do you help them move out of that addiction? How do you, because it's so, we're fed it at every possible level. It's media, it's TV, it's movies, it's, it's everything we're told, particularly inside of the quote unquote the American dream, which I actually don't think has got anything to do with it at all. How do you direct people to be able to see that the process they're in is an addictive process and that it actually doesn't serve them, and what they can do about it?
So the biggest thing that I do is to help them identify their payoff. Because in any addiction, we know there's a reason why people overdrink or take drugs, because it freaking feels good. Sure, right? Sure. There's a payoff. There's Absolutely. A pleasure payoff. And when we talk about overwork as an addiction, and when I'm dealing with somebody that their life is truly, even though the word balance is so vilified now, but that concept of they're so out of whack, we spend a lot of time talking about what is it that what's their payoff? What's the pleasure? What are they getting out of it? And invariably for many, it's this concept of feeling important.
Significance,
Yep. But it's taken to an extreme. And so where, if they sit at work, they have power, they're important, they're needed, they're indispensable, quote unquote. They're,
Until somebody else comes along, buddy.
Well, or I know this sounds terrible, but when somebody drops dead on the job, the company keeps going. And it's remarkable. And actually, it's quite awful. You see it, it's just like it's like a ripple in a pond, and things keep moving. And that is absolutely true. So I think people get really stuck on this fact that I'm so important. I'm the center of the universe. I have power. And a lot of times, if they've had a practice of making work their God, candidly, everything is a mess outside of work. And they don't have a sense of mastery or importance. Nobody's kissing their ass at home. No. And it's hard and it's messy and it's complicated. And so what do? They do more of the same. They stay at work and they overwork, and because they keep getting a payoff.
Exactly.
And what's interesting working with professionals or those in the corporate tribe who I love is that when they can identify what their payoff is for that addiction job, then they can start saying, well, is this really serving me? Is this serving my whole life? Mm-hmm. And guess what? There's some people who don't want to change. They go, you know what? I recognize it, but I don't want to make the changes that's required for me to do something else. The majority of time, once people see it, they go, I want something different. So Let me find another payoff. Yeah. And where can I get that from? And that's when things really start to cook, because people are conscious and they're making conscious, courageous choices.
And I think that's a great insight for people is exactly that, is that what are you looking for as a payoff? And when I bring that up with people, the executives that I work with, and I say, every behavior has a payoff. I don't care what it is that you do, every behavior has a payoff. And they go, well, this is a really shitty thing, so what's my payoff? And my answer to them often is, your payoff is validation. So if it's a shitty belief and so it's the validation of this shitty belief, and that makes you feel like, oh, see, I'm right, I am a loser. And that's a payoff. So it can be all kinds of things, and I think it's really important for people to dig into that. And I know that in your book you get into a lot more depth with people, and it's really important that they get to the book, give it a read, because there's all kinds of great stuff in there. Like I said, I had a fantastic conversation with Mindy. We met. It was really awesome. And the depth of this woman and what she offers and her background is so valuable to you. Make sure you get the book. Mindy, can you tell people a little bit more about where they can get a hold of the book, where they can get a hold of you, if they want to hire you or bring you on or maybe interview you? How could they reach out to you? Where can they get in touch with the resources that you offer?
Sure. Well, first of all, you can buy the book anywhere where it's sold, ebooks or online or your local independent bookstore, which I'm always very happy to plug. I love independent bookstores, but love Amazon too. Where my website is probably the easiest way for people to get a hold of me, www.mindymackenzie.com. And Mackenzie is spelled Mackenzie. And you guys can email me if you want, info@mindymackenzie.com. And I'll definitely get back to you. I do keynotes. I work with executives. I love the corporate tribe because I am a member of the corporate tribe. None of this is academic, and I find it very fulfilling to help people help themselves.
Yeah, and that's what when you and I were chatting, that's one of the things I really loved about you is that not only have you been there, done that, but like you said, you raised a family, you did all those kinds of things, all the things that we're told you can't do, it is possible to do without selling your soul. And I found that to be a really refreshing message from you, is that you can climb to the top. It isn't a game, and you can do it without selling your soul, and you can do it and reach fulfillment. So if you're looking for that kind of guidance, and if you're looking for a keynote speaker or somebody to bring in and work with your team, reach out to Mindy. As she said, she gave her a URL. I will make sure that it's posted on the site, and we'll make sure that it's there for you to connect with. It'll be, and you'll probably see it right at the bottom there of the video, how to get a hold of Mindy. Please reach out to her, stay connected to her. It's been great having you on the show, Mindy. Please stay with us, and I'm just going to close up, and then I'll come back to you. And I want to thank you, dear listener, for joining us today, for being part of the show. If you are serious about embracing the kind of positive disruption that builds a corporate culture of authentic leadership and fiercely loyal people within inside your organization who become evangelical, that's a different word, evangelicable, okay, try that one, evangelical about your organization, then reach out to me and my organization through fullmontyleadership.com. Just like the movie, fullmontyleadership.com. Remember, also I have a gift for you. I've created a program called The Matrix Full Monty. It's actually the Authentic Leadership Matrix. You can go to Matrix, just like in the movie spelled, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. It's 197 value. We put it out there because it's just in its sort of testing stages, and you're going to love it because it'll actually walk you through the 5 categories of authentic leadership to test yourself in. You may be surprised to see how your results are. So get yourself over there, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. It's my gift to you. Thank you for joining us here on Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty Leadership series. And again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Get over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And until next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.